Ready when you are.
Hi, I'm John Twist of University Motors. Today I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, we want to pass on our condolences to Bob Forsblom and Susan Logan, who owned Riverside Garage, the shop of the late Eric Jones, who passed away 3-4 years ago in August. And they just had a fire, and the fire was all consuming. And everything at Riverside Motors in the main building was reduced to ash. An incredibly hot fire, 3 or 4 cars inside the shop, customer cars, owners' cars, all kinds of possessions and tools. Fires are horrible, horrible things. So our thoughts go out to Bob and everyone else who's associated with Riverside Motors in Delaware, Ohio. Hey, today I want to talk about 2 different things. First, I want to talk about a clutch. We had a car come in with a bad clutch, and you pressed on the pedal and it didn't throw out, the gears ground, and you could feel that the hydraulics weren't very good. But when we went in to do it, we found that the push rod was that worn. Okay, that's pretty worn, more than pretty worn. And the clevis pin was this worn. Okay. So that's even more worn. So the pedal, of course, looked a lot like this too, but there wasn't anything we could do with the pedal. We were able to find another push rod that wasn't so worn, and we were able to find another clevis pin, certainly. But the combination of these 2 things allow for so much lost motion. And you press on the pedal, and the pedal, I think on the clutch it's about a 7-to-1 ratio. So 7 times this, you're dealing in 1.5 inches or something. All of a sudden you've got that much of nothing which is going on. So we rebuilt the hydraulics and got that working out okay. But what I really want to talk about today, and the title of this, is front brakes. So I've got my customer who says, well, I got this noise in my front brakes. So let's take a look and see what this noise might have been. You can see that the pad material is ground away here. Look at this metal on metal. When you step on the brakes, horrible sound. And it does damage to the rotor. Here we've got the rotor. The rotor is all scarred up here. Starts to look like a 33 record. Backside's all groovy, where it's the pad was all worn into it, and there's rust all over. So these are so thin at the get-go that there's really no point in turning them. You can buy new ones for, gosh, they're only $40 or so. But you can't change just one, because in the front, both brakes have to grab, and you have to have the brakes working exactly the same in the front, or it'll take the steering wheel and pull it out of your hand. So here we go. Here we got the rotor, the new rotor on here. So when you go to change the rotor on the car, the first thing you do before you even take it apart, you pull the split pin out of the front. You take a 1 1/8 inch socket and you put it on here and you tighten up the nut as tight as you can get it. Okay, and see if this still spins relatively freely. This spins freely enough. Okay, this is just on the edge of being perhaps a little too snug, but it still spins. That lets you know that the number of shims on the inside of here are correct. And then all you have to do is take the hub off, change the rotor, put the hub back on. If you tightened up this nut all the way and it locked the front end up, you'd know that there weren't enough shims. And on the other hand, if you tightened up the nut all the way and you could take the hub and shake it and you got a tunk, 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 you'd know that it was too loose. So the goal here, when this nut is all the way tight, is to have it spin relatively freely and not tunk. So if we put a dial indicator, a magnetic dial indicator here, and put the pin here on the stub axle and moved it back and forth, we'd probably have 0.5 thousandths of clearance here, maybe 1 thousandths or so. You got to have something, and better to have around two or 3. While you're doing this job, you want to make sure that you hang the brake caliper by a hook You can't let it dangle by the hose. If it hangs by the hose, it wrecks the hose. And we've got a car on the other hoist right now whose front brake hose burst. Very unusual, but here it is, you know. I mean, the newest MGB is 32 years old, and I think the one that's on the hoist is probably 77, so that makes it a 35-year-old vehicle, and the front brake hose burst, and that's a real creepy thing to have happen when you go to hit the brakes hard, is to have the brakes suddenly like give way, go to the floor. Now you're still stopping on your rear brakes, but the rear brakes don't hold a candle to the front brakes. In the best of circumstances, the rear brakes are doing 1/3 of the braking, the front brakes are doing 2/3 of the braking. So it's really important that you have your front brakes. So all I have to do is put this caliper back on. You know, before I took this thing off, I withdrew the pistons. You can see that the pistons on the inside here are not pushed out towards the middle. The pistons are pushed back into their holes. And there's two ways to do that. One is to just get a big screwdriver, a pair of screwdrivers, and a big pair of channel locks and just squeeze them back in, right? Where does that fluid go? It goes back up into the master cylinder, and if the master cylinder is full, it goes out the little air bleed hole in the master cylinder. And that hole is so small that it'll turn it into an aerosol. It'll turn it almost into a vapor. So you're squeezing it here, and it's blowing out that little tiny vent hole and getting all over the fenders, getting all over the bonnet, the doors. So the better way to withdraw these is to crack the bleeder open, squeeze the pucks back into the caliper with the bleeder open. That's while it's still all attached. You know, then there's no fluid getting pushed back up into the inside. And when you go to bleed it and put it all back together, you're going to run a whole lot of fresh fluid through the system, and that's not a bad idea because the old fluid has got water in it. Despite everyone's attempts to keep the water out, there's always water in the brake fluid. That causes rusting and stuff like that. So anyway, that's just a real quick note about the front brakes on the MGB. Front rotors are real cheap. You know, change them, put the pads on. There are drilled and slotted rotors. Personally, I don't think those are necessary for most everybody's driving habits. It's been a long time since anyone's overheated their brakes. My associate, Carl Heidemann at Eclectic Motor Works in Holland, wanted to see how much braking it would take to get his brakes to fade. So he did 0s to 60s to 0s, and he had to step on the brakes. I think maybe after 10 times, the brakes started to get pretty spongy. They were getting so hot that the brake fluid was boiling. So it isn't very common that you're doing 0 to 60 to 0 10, 12 times in a row. Racetrack, that's all different. But just out on the road, pretty unusual to boil your brakes. I want to remind everybody that this coming weekend, which is around October 6th, October 7th, no, I'm a month ahead. September 6th or 7th, the weekend after Labor Day, 2013, this is 2013, there's a 19th annual British Car Show in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I'll be there at Del Grosso's, just north of Altoona, on Sunday. So if you want some information, you can go on the web and Google British Car Show Altoona. Up it'll come, and you can contact Jim Pastore and get the information and come on along. We'd love to see you. It's always a nice show, about 100 cars, an eclectic mix of Spridgets and Land Rovers and Aston Martins, and there's always something new and something exciting. Hey, until later, safety fast.